I want to get back to the accreditation. How do you accredit? How do you make sure that, you know, accreditation is done and it is done properly to standard? You know, for us as the media people, for our accreditation, we just need our badge.
Yeah.
You know, that badge for Media Council of Kenya. When I have that, I'm accredited as a journalist in the country. So how do you work on, you know, accreditation? And this is across the continent.
Okay, yeah. In AFRAC, for instance, AFRAC is an association, as I said, of accreditation bodies. Now, each of those accreditation bodies, such as KENAS in Kenya, is responsible to comply to what we call an international standard. That international standard is the ISO IEC 17011 standard. Now, for KENAS to become a signatory to AFRAC's arrangement, it needs to fully comply to that standard. And we will assess KENAS against that particular standard. KENAS was successful in that. KENAS is signatory to the AFRAC arrangement, and so are all the other accreditation bodies that are signatories to that. Now, for a body to be accredited by KENAS, they need to comply to very specific requirements. Laboratories, for instance, need to comply to the international standard, ISO IEC 17011. So it's not as easy as the media one. They need to demonstrate that they comply. They need to demonstrate that the people are competent. They need to demonstrate that they have the right environment in which they can conduct tests. They need the right procedures, the policies, everything around that. And they need to demonstrate that to an assessment team. And every 18 months, at least minimum 18 months, that team from KENAS would go there and evaluate that laboratory that they've accredited. If they comply to those requirements, they will receive the certificate of accreditation. So it's and it's very specific for what they can do. It's not saying that once you're accredited, a laboratory accredited, you can do everything. It's very specific to the competencies that's within that accreditation body, or within that conformity assessment body, in the laboratory, in the inspection body, or certification body. That is what they can do. They is accredited for a limited scope that they can prove their competency in. And like I said, every year, every 18 months, they get reevaluated. Now, the beauty of this is that because there's a body that confirms the competence of this particular body, this body, such as KENAS, is also signatory to the international mutual recognition arrangement, the arrangement that recognizes KENAS' competence. And therefore, if this body is accredited by KENAS, the results should be accepted by all those bodies that are signatories to the international body. And there are more than 105 economies in Europe, in Americas, and Asia that belongs to that needs to promote the results of KENAS accredited facility globally. And that is how we get the goods and services accepted in other countries. So they know that this good, this phone or whatever that comes with this accreditation certificate, we can rely on that because it's reliable, it will work for us, and it meets the compliance standards that has been set aside for this phone to operate in.
Okay, I get that. So every country has an accreditation body.
Most countries have an accreditation body.
Okay.
However, the services are provided in certain cases. For instance, KENAS would provide accreditation to some of the countries that do not have an accreditation body. In SADC, we have one accreditation body that we've established intentionally because some of the countries are very small. And so to sustain accreditation body there, we knew from the start they won't be able to do that. And therefore we have established one accreditation body that serves 13 member countries in the SADC region. So the services are available to all 52 countries or accessible to all 52 countries, not necessarily must have a national body to provide that service.
Okay. So maybe what are some of the challenges that you are facing as an accreditation body?
Actually, one of the key challenges we have at Face and Accreditation Body is the resources to be able to supply the service. We rely heavily. It's an assurance business. The same way the Auditor General requires staff to carry out an audit. So we require competent people for different scopes to be able to undertake the assessments. As KENAS today, we have gotten into the space of greenhouse gas emissions. We're supporting the aviation sector. Be able to have the scheme under the ICAO, the carbon reduction scheme for international aviation. Kenya has a deadline by 2027 to be able to monitor and supply the results. So anybody who is doing currently any validation verification in the country, we have very few. if I went across the region, perhaps we'll count something like 30 people. Yeah. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have, and that's why we, as a corporation, we're looking at sharing the resource. If South Africa have developed, if Egypt have developed capacity on that, we then exchange and they come and train our people that we already have within that scope of aviation, and then we're able then to supply the services across. So that's one of the biggest hindrance to penetration of accreditation. The second one, this is particularly, I think, across Africa. Recognition of accreditation by regulators. We exist as a tool for regulators. Regulators invest in a laboratory. So one of the things that happens is they impair the independence required. So you say, I will take the sample and I want to test it myself. Now, the international standard and what we use as international standards is, these are the only, worldwide recognized standards. This is one thing we speak in one voice. If it's a laboratory standard, all 164 members have agreed on a particular standard. If it's inspection, there is 164 members of ISO and IEC have agreed to it. So that's one good thing that we have, that we can tell everybody that this is the only global standard. But what we have regulators doing is create a standard for themselves or regulation that then says, I will check you in the context of their licensing. So that's the second barrier that we have, to ensure that the market is able to be supplied with the services. The third one is awareness. Accreditation came into being not more than 40 years ago as a mechanism globally. But it existed since 1921 in Australia, for example, 1912 in the US. It's been a mechanism that has been taken and used. Regulators no longer, they give out the opportunity for self-regulation among different sectors of the industry. And people call out accreditation to be able to demonstrate that they comply and consumers are aware, the public are aware. So those are three challenges that maybe I can put across.
Yeah. You're okay with those ones?
I'm okay with that one.
You wanted to add maybe?
Not necessarily. I think Martin has covered it well. And the key issue is the understanding. The accreditation is there for trade, but similarly accreditation there for health, safety, environment protection. That we know that is the sphere of government. And it plays a key role in that particular area of providing those services to give trust to government, to remove subjectivity in decision making, because you now have actual facts to back up your decisions of how do we spend budget on this particular education or in this particular health sector, on this particular medicines that we would buy,
Okay, so the meeting has been ongoing, and the last day of the meeting that is happening is tomorrow. So maybe if you can just touch on what it is all about, what are you talking about in this meeting, who are involved in this particular meeting?
So yes, the General Assembly is tomorrow, after the whole weeks of discussion. So what's happening this week, there are various technical committees meeting at this point in time. As Martin said, we deal from the issue from education, the changing standards. We're looking at our in particular environment. Climate change is a big issue. So we're starting to discuss the standards that we're going to need, and the conformity assessment we're going to need to support those decision makers in terms of climate change. So we've got an international standard at the moment. It's the ISO 17009, which deals with verification, validation in the greenhouse gases, for instance. So a lot of those technical discussions will come up into this final meeting, General Assembly meeting, where, as I already said, we are represented by basically all the economies on the continent. A few more still have to come on board, but the majority are on there, more than 25 covered, 27 covered at this point in time. So the discussions tomorrow deals very specifically, one, with how do we make sure that the accreditation and accreditation requirements is aligned to the needs of our region. Specifically the AFCFTA issues, how are we going to support the AFCFTA going forward in terms of what we need to provide. And the second issue is really to discuss the needs of our accreditation bodies. how do we create the new other accreditation bodies to get up to the level of, for instance, Canada, where they become a signatory to the arrangement? So those are the discussions, and the third level of discussions as well deals with the consumers, deals with the stakeholders as well. How do we serve the stakeholders better? So tomorrow's discussion, or this whole week's discussion, will accumulate tomorrow into that, the final deliberations on the way forward. How do we influence the international requirements? In a lot of cases, we are finding, in fact, one of the pillars of AFRAC was basically dealing with that function of how do we have an international voice, an African voice in the international fora. So we will discuss, obviously, those as well, because there are new developments internationally, and we need to have our say and our voice in that forums as well. So part of that discussions will also happen tomorrow.
And how does domestic assurance contribute to this success?
Okay, as Kenas, one of the things that our domestic assurance gives, especially within, let's look at the African continent, is acceptance of results. If we produce this product and the test report goes with our accreditation, anybody within Africa should accept it. That's the first thing we do. Now, domestic assurance, what we supply, and this is perhaps in the medical area, you have malaria, you go to hospital. How sure are you that the result is going to come out correctly or validly? We give that assurance. Currently, we have more than 144 laboratories accredited in the medical space. For the basic primary tests, the common diseases that are there, malaria, typhoid, brucellosis, we have, including HIV. So the network of laboratories, the more the network of laboratories, the more access to valid results that doctors rely on, and the more they can give you the right cure. So you do not go to hospital and say you're told you have this, and then you're prescribed a different medication that has side effects on you. So that's one of the things we give in terms of supporting the health sector. When it comes to the product sector, the things we consume, everyday quality assurance. Today we have more than 400 water bottlers in Kenya. They require a laboratory before they release their product to the market. Very few invest in a laboratory. But we have a network of laboratories that test the water on an ongoing basis, besides getting the certification that they require to supply in the market, the KBC mark. So on a regular basis, that test, when you release a batch, how sure are you? And they're protecting their brands. The first primacy is to ensure that the brand is a continued quality within the market and safety within the market, that it is not having harmful bacteria and everything. Then on an yearly basis, the KBS come and pick sample from the market, wherever it is, and they confirm that actually conforms, that they sustain their mark. So those are the elements that we do in terms of assuring within the economy. We also assure you that you can fly to Mombasa safely. We work across sectors. The choke wrenches that are used to tighten tires of planes is under an accreditation we've given the calibration laboratories that operate both at Wilson and JKI. How Kenya got to go to the US directly was because of the accreditation we granted the Kenya Airways calibration laboratory. So we moved from general product to services to high precision areas. So those are some of the things we assure that allows global participation of Kenya.
What are some of the benefits to this, this robust domestic assurance? What are the advantages?
One of the key issues, and I'll give Martin that one on the domestic one, but I think one of the key issues, as Martin has basically said, is this tested, inspected, certified ones accepted everywhere. It avoids that re-testing, that re-inspection or re-certification, and does make the product more competitive in the international environment or the export environment. So those are one of the key drivers of this this particular area, or advantages that organizations have.
We have regulators who rely on us today, a number of them very, very, very well. For example, the school buses, they're all yellow buses. At the end of it, there's an accredited inspection body inspecting it. So that's a benefit to the citizens. You, peace of mind if you have children riding on that bus. If you look in the recent past, there have been few fatal accidents that involve school buses. because the person who's inspecting it is accredited, and that gives assurance to NTSA to give a license for the bus to go on the road. The same with the petroleum sector. There is a Kenyan standard established for it. That Kenyan standard is subject to an inspection. The inspection is underpinned by accreditation. There was a fuel tanker last year, I think, Mayu. It rolled. There was no fatality. The fuel wasn't lost. It was delivered to the next truck, and the recovery took place. So we moved away from the public outcry concerns like the Salga incidences by giving, I am an investor in a petroleum tanker that I need to move fuel from point A to point B. I maintain my assurance so we give you peace of mind that that inspection was accredited. So those are two simple examples I can give. We have thousands of others, like I mentioned about the medical. Doctors today look at, if they send you to laboratory, they look at our list of accredited medical laboratories, depending on where you are. I can do a diagnosis from Nairobi, but I'm somebody who is a resident in Kisumu. I tell you, go to this laboratory, get the test, let the results be sent to me.
I think one of the key benefits for SMEs, very specific, it levels the playing field. So whether you're a big organization or whether you're a small organization, once you're accredited, you are equal. It's just deal then from that point of view with the volumes you can produce. But the quality, nobody should be able to doubt it because you've been evaluated, you've been assessed, you've been accredited, your results can be relied on.
How does accreditation generally, as we wind up, contribute to quality assurance?
Accreditation does not only contribute to quality assurance, it contributes to the 5 aspects I mentioned. Safety. I talked about school buses. That's about safety.
Yes.
Okay. I talked about the results you're getting from a laboratory. Okay, that's a validity of a results. That goes in the context of quality. Then we have the environment. There's environmental testing that is being done currently. There is noise pollution. Today you hear everybody wanting to have a place closed because it's next to the neighborhood. How sure are you? Your decibel meter is giving the valid range. So there's a calibration that is done for that. So we again deal with the environmental aspects. We have pollution from motor vehicles. Today we are not doing that as a regulation within Kenya that is mandatory, but it's done outside the country. But in other countries, every year you take your car for pollution emission testing, and then you correct it or you dump the car. So we cover the aspect of environment. But you mentioned about level playing field. We support a fair trade. At the end of the chain, it is the market and the consumer who benefits. So there is a series of things that happen. So let me break it this way. A standard without conformity is not quality, safety, or environment. A regulation without enforcement, supported by conformity, is nothing. So I think I can put it that way.
My final question, how do we unlock Africa's potential?
There's an old saying in Africa saying that Africa is too rich to be poor.
Which is true.
Which is true, and which is actually at the heart of everything we do. How do we unlock that? The Continental Free Trade Area gives us a good opportunity to do so. But for us to be able to do so, we need to address these issues that cause the barriers for us to be able to trade. I think Martin has highlighted a few of those barriers that we have currently in place that we need to address. Some of these things are not necessary anymore. Environment has changed from the times when it was necessary. It requires a reevaluation of all these processes. It requires a technical support in terms of standards, in terms of metrology, the guys who do the measurements issues, make sure that our kilogram is the same kilogram that you'll find right around the world. It requires these issues of accreditation to give confidence not only within Africa but globally as well. We know that goods produced in Africa, even if we increase trade amongst ourselves, some of those goods that we produce here are input to something bigger that we export. And therefore, our international markets will need to have the same confidence in that goods and services. So we need to unlock a lot of these and destroy these barriers that we currently have in place. And there's already a lot of progress in that being done, made in this particular area as well. So we are actually quite excited as AFRAC and as the quality infrastructure institutions on the continent that we can contribute to that part of it. But politicians, technocrats, everybody, the users, people, consumers need to ask more, need to demand more in terms of, I want an accredited certificate. Paternity testing, I want to see objective evidence of this has been done in a accredited lab so I can rely on it results. So yeah, we need to ask more, we need to challenge more and become less just accepting.
All right, thank you so much. You had something to add on to that as we wind up?
I think to unlock, we need to lose some bad habits.
Okay.
In Kenya, we have more than 120 regulators. And the one thing that they need to start thinking is the structure of regulation has evolved. We didn't have tools like accreditation today.
Yeah.
And they need to start considering that. And I put it at the very beginning. Regulations are reactive. There has been a failure. So they need to look at tools that create a proactive mechanism to compliance to be able to then unlock all this. And the bad habits are, we need to ask ourselves, do we need to regulate in the first place? Can the market itself clean up? There was a time in Italy, there was an outcry. What did Italians do? They just let the public outcry lead into an action from the consumers, and they never ended up regulating. So a product that was of poor quality left the market. There was no opportunity for that person to supply anything. And some of the things we need to start thinking, that we really need to regulate. If we must, can we use tools as standards which are more proactive and accreditation to support that? Because that's what we see in evidence, that it works. Other economies are doing it very well. Thank you.
We get that. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ron and Mr. Chesire, and thank you so much for letting us in on this discussion. I believe that us back at home, those who are back at home, I said us and I'm here. I believe that those of you who are watching us back at home have been able to learn a thing or two from this discussion. Right now, I want to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll be joined by Gladys Mungai, who is all the way in Lodwar for the Senate proceedings.